All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're looking at a huge, fundamental shock to the global economy. It's a crude awakening that has jumped from being a possibility to being a reality, and we're going to break down exactly what this means for all of us. This quote really gets to the heart of it. For years, the market was pricing in the risk of a crisis. But now, we're living through an actual, catastrophic failure of the energy supply. The problem isn't hypothetical anymore. It's here. And that brings us to the first part of this whole mess, what's essentially a supply-side cardiac arrest. The lifeblood of the global economy, crude oil, it's just not flowing like it should, and the entire system is going into shock because of it. For decades, oil prices always had this thing called a geopolitical fear premium built in. A buffer for the risk that something bad might happen. Well, that insurance policy has just been cashed in. We're not pricing in fear anymore. We're dealing with the fallout of an actual supply collapse. The buffer is gone. To really get the scale of this, let's just look at Iraq, a cornerstone of global oil production. Before all this started, it was pumping out a massive 4.3 million barrels every single day. Keep that number in your head. And this is where we are now. Output has totally collapsed to just 1.3 million barrels per day. That is a staggering drop. We're not talking about some minor disruption here. This is a near total shutdown of a major global supplier. This chart just visualizes the collapse perfectly. A 70% contraction. As you can see, this isn't a small dip. It's like a key pillar of the world's oil supply has been almost completely yanked out from under us. And the problem is getting even worse at the Strait of Hormuz, the world's biggest oil choke point. Insurers, well, they're not willing to cover shipments anymore, so suppliers are invoking force majeure. It's a legal term for when things happen that are totally beyond your control. It's basically a formal way of saying, hey, the system is broken, we can't guarantee delivery. So this abstract crisis, it has very, very real consequences. Think about a country like Japan. It relies on the Middle East for 95% of its crude oil. For them, this isn't just some story on the news, it's a full-blown national emergency. The question becomes really basic. How do you even power your country? Okay, so that shockwave is now making landfall in the real economy, and that kicks off Act 2, the dangerous collision of inflation and recession. This is where things start to get painful for everyone. The first hit comes at the diesel pump. Prices have surged 15%. And you have to remember, diesel is the fuel of industry. It powers our trucks, our farms, our factories. So a spike like this, it acts like a hidden tax on everything we buy.
And this really illustrates the direct impact, doesn't it? It now costs $46 more just to fill up the tank of a single heavy-duty truck. And that cost, it doesn't just vanish. It gets passed on to us, driving up the price of groceries, clothes, electronics, literally anything that gets moved on a truck.
So when costs for businesses shoot up this fast, they have to make some pretty brutal decisions. For months, we kept hearing about how resilient the job market was. Well, that story is over. We just saw a net loss of 92,000 jobs in a single month because companies had to cut their biggest expense, their people. Which brings us to the fundamental and, frankly, terrifying question at the heart of this entire crisis. What happens when the cost of living is skyrocketing, but the economy that's supposed to support our lives is actually shrinking? Well, the answer has a name, stagflation, and it is the absolute worst of both worlds. You've got stagnating growth, people losing jobs, businesses failing, and that's colliding with high inflation, where your money buys less and less every day. It's an economic poison, and there's just no easy antidote. And that lack of an antidote, that leads us right into our final act, the unsolvable policy trap. We're about to see why the people in charge, the central bankers and the politicians, are basically flying blind here. Okay, just look at this because it lays out the problem perfectly. In a normal recession, the playbook is simple, right? The Federal Reserve cuts interest rates to make borrowing cheaper, to get the economy moving again. But they can't do that now. Cutting rates would be like pouring gasoline on the fire of inflation. So their hands are completely tied. So with the private market pulling back and central banks totally paralyzed, governments are being forced to step in as the insurer of last resort. And we're talking about massive interventions, like the US government creating a $20 billion backstop just to get shipping insurance markets to work again. This is basically wartime-level economic intervention. So what does all this mean for the future? This isn't some temporary storm we can just ride out. No, this is a structural reset. So welcome to the new reality. a just-in-case future.
So here are the key things to watch. First, expect inflation to be sticky. That diesel tax we talked about is going to keep bleeding into the cost of food and rent. Second, growth is going to be restricted. With borrowing costs staying high, businesses won't expand and hiring will stay weak. And third, we're going to see huge systemic realignments. The focus is shifting to the basics, like food security, and just making sure our supply chains don't completely break.
And that really brings us to the final crucial point. For decades, our entire economy was built on just-in-time efficiency. Well, that era is over. We are now in an age of just-in-case survival, where being resilient is way more important than being fast. And the final question for all of us is, what will we as consumers and as citizens have to give up to get that security?